Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. The opioid crisis is obviously one of the starkest problems that Americans face today, and that's certainly true of my home state of Missouri. We're one of the harder hit states. I think in 2017, 50,000 Americans, if I'm not incorrect, died from opioid overdoses, and in Missouri that number is almost 1,000, and that number unfortunately is growing. One of the most interesting pieces of data that I've recently come across is Missouri's farmers. This is obviously an urban problem, a suburban problem, and a rural problem, but data indicate that 74% of farmers in my home state have been affected by the opioid crisis, including, of course, fentanyl. So this is a very, very serious thing. I want to ask you about two aspects of that crisis. First, the border component, and then the component related to the Chinese government. Starting on the border, it seems to me, based on the testimony that you've offered, written remarks, the prosecutors that I've talked to, that we really have here a serious problem of other countries sending drugs into the country. And my understanding is the vast majority of the illegal opioids like fentanyl that come into this country are trafficked from China and Mexico. Is that correct? I mean, do I have that correct, Mr. Chester? You're nodding your head.
Yes, Senator, that is correct. So in regards to heroin, plant-based heroin, Mexico is the preponderant source of heroin. Somewhere above 90% of the heroin that is seized and tested in the United States is of Mexican origin. Mexico is also a source of illicit fentanyl. There is a transit point from finished fentanyl that was shipped into Mexico and then across the southwest border. In many cases, already milled into heroin or pressed in, or milled into heroin or other drugs, or pressed into pill form. And then China is also a source of fentanyl directly shipped to the United States through the mail system or through express consignment carriers. And China is the preponderant source of fentanyl and fentanyl analogs and synthetic opioids in the United States. That is correct.
I read the other day about a single drug bust where the Customs and Border Protection seized 254 pounds of fentanyl at the southern border, and I understand that would be enough to kill approximately 100 million people. Can you tell me more, Mr. Chester, or anybody on the panel, about the importance of border security for combating this epidemic? Go ahead, Mr. Chester.
Yes, sir. I can start, and then I can turn it over to Justice. Yeah, absolutely. There are a significant amount of drugs of all kinds, both plant-based like heroin and cocaine, and synthetic drugs like fentanyl, methamphetamine, fentanyl analogs that come across the southwest border, and really across all the borders into the United States. The seizures of fentanyl on the southwest border, in a lot of cases, though their purity is different than what we see through the mail system, and so you see much less pure fentanyl coming across the southwest border, and what comes through our mail and express consignment directly from China tends to be in much smaller amounts, but much more pure, 90% or above pure. And I'll turn it over to my law enforcement colleagues as well.
And I can say that in the cases that I've prosecuted or supervised, specifically with respect to the Sinaloa cartel, we have been seeing members of that cartel doing anything and everything they can to get their drugs into the United States. Similar to what Mr. Chester said, we are seeing lower levels of purity, but we are seeing larger quantities being transported from Mexico. We are also seeing the fentanyl being mixed in with other types of drugs, such as cocaine, methamphetamine, and obviously heroin. And like I said, those traffickers are using any manner of means to get it into the United States to make as much money as possible.
Thank you for that. So that there's a border angle here that's very, very important, a border security angle, also security of the mails angle that's very important. Let me ask you about the Chinese government connection. I just want to read to you a quotation from a Chinese government official, Vice Commissioner of China's National Narcotics Control Commission, just a few weeks ago. He said, China's control over fentanyl drugs is very strict. It cannot be the main source for the United States. The U.S. accusation lacks evidence and is contrary to the facts. Does someone want to respond to the accuracy of that statement that China is not the main source of fentanyl coming into this country?
This is a refrain we've heard from the Chinese government for many years. They understand, and one of the principal outcomes of President Xi's commitment to President Trump that they would schedule fentanyl as a class is an understanding and an acknowledgement on the part of China that they are in fact a source of fentanyl coming into the United States. The evidence of Chinese provenance of fentanyl in the United States has been presented to the government of China at all levels, and it is not at all an area of dispute that China provides the fentanyl that comes into the United States.
Yeah, so you referenced the recent moves by China to begin to exert some control over their fentanyl production. They have not done this, of course, in previous years and prior administrations, and I think the question is why. Would it be fair to say that the Chinese government has, at least to a point, knowingly looked the other way as fentanyl traffickers in China effectively poison thousands of Americans? Is that a fair statement?
I think the Chinese government would say that they have a vast chemical industry, somewhere around 160,000 chemical companies of some kind. They have difficulty in controlling all of that, and that they would tell us that they've done their level best in order to exert some kind of control over this. However, I think their acknowledgement and their agreement to do class scheduling was a result of several things. I think it was a result, number one, of the interest on the part of the Congress, repeatedly through congressional delegations, through letters, letting the Chinese government understand that the entire United States government wants to see them take affirmative action against this particular problem. The second thing was the direct intervention and the leadership by the president, who directly asked at the G20 summit last December, President Xi to take definitive action against this. I think both of those things, and an acknowledgement that the Chinese government played a serious role in this, all came together for the Chinese government to take this very important step.
Last question, Mr. Chairman. Can I just ask, how can we ensure that Chinese leaders will keep their word when they say they're going to crack down on the illicit manufacture of these drugs?
And I can pass it over to DEA and to Justice. I know that they have several folks on the ground in China that work directly with the Chinese government and Chinese law enforcement authorities to ensure that they follow through on this.
So part of our effort leading up to the May 1st class-wide scheduling was a robust engagement with our law enforcement counterparts in China. And we'll continue to do that. As a matter of fact, this month, we're expanding our presence in China, opening a Guangzhou office, hopefully by the end of this month. So our active engagement with our law enforcement partners in China is the key to that. As a matter of fact, just in May, they've asked for our sentencing guidelines based upon how we sentence traffickers in the United States. So that robust engagement, law enforcement to law enforcement, is going to be critically important for DEA.